Hello and welcome back to Rev Endurance Sports, and today we're going to talk about the saddle swap I'm doing between the SQ Lab 612 and the Ritchey Skyline Saddle. There is a previous video out there for the unboxing and another video as to the reasoning behind the saddle swap. So before we go any further, if you're interested in any of those Ritchey products or anything else, SQ Lab as well, please reach out to me directly. Contact information is always down below. revcycling@gmail.com. Pretty simple. And that's a great way to support the channel so I can do things like this. Purchase items to evaluate them for you. Okay, so I'm not getting rid of my SQ Lab saddle. It's just that there's been interest on the channel and then also through private messaging. All right, so first things first, everyone has their own way of measuring their saddle height. I have my way of measuring saddle height. I think my way works for me. You decide what works for you. Across different bikes, I find that my method works better because it incorporates the crank length. So there are a lot of measurements that talk about from the center of the bottom bracket. So it's just such a nebulous point. I mean, you just can't really make it precise. So for me, what works for me, because I use Shimano crank sets, again, it's my own personal method for my own personal bikes, but it works for a lot of other stuff. So Shimano, the crank hole spindle, that's also very hard to, like, where's the center of the spindle? So I just grab it from the tip of the crank arm and then I go up. So that's how I do saddle height. And I try to align the crank arm with the seat tube access. Oh, lots of questions about my bike size. Let's be clear on this. This is what works for me. This is not fitting advice for the public at large. I ride a 55 Road Logic. I have my saddle centered in the rails. I'll see if I can do some B-roll on this later. But my saddle is basically centered in the rails. I ride a 120 stem, 3 centimeters of stack, just because I do ultras. So this is the same bike I used for 600Ks, two 600Ks in May, 2 weeks apart, 400K, tons of climbing as well. The bike I used for PvP was also a Road Logic, but I had cut the steer tube years before I even thought I was going to do PvP. Paris-Brest Paris, a 1,200 kilometer event. I had cut the steer tube on it, had the stem all the way down, and that bike was just basically a century, double century bike. I never thought I would do 760 miles on it in one clip. So I did PvP with the bars all the way down to the top cap. So this geometry works for me. 120 stem works for me. I find that the bike is super stable, or much more stable with longer stems than shorter stems. And one of the biggest, or one of the most common fitting issues I find here at the shop is people are riding bikes that are too small, they're too cramped, they don't know how to, bend at the waist and bend their elbows. So I have long legs, as you'll see by my measurement, and I have a short torso, but I am able to get down into a fairly aerodynamic position for a 60-year-old man. I'm 59, but you get the idea. Okay, so now to the measurement. And always, before you even start, have something to write with and something to write on. Your memory can fail you, especially when you're talking, you know, half centimeter or millimeter increments. Was that 94 or was that 96 or 95, right? So, all right. You want to come up the center of the axis all the way through. So, put on the readers, bottom of the crank arm. So that for me is 95 centimeters. Okay, you can zoom in, you can do whatever you want there. It's going to be hard to shoot B-roll of that unless I have someone physically with me here in the shop. It's actually a little bit more than 95. Okay, so that's the first measurement I want. Right, I already said I'm pretty much centered in the rail, so I'll try to follow that, but that's not important. What is important is my setback. And pardon my back for a minute. So my setback is about 8 centimeters, which is fairly normal for a 5'9", 5'10" type person, femurs, all that stuff. And then, so I want 95-ish. I want about 8 centimeters of setback. Then I'm going to want to keep my reach the same. So that's 56 centimeters to the center of the clamp. And now, so that incorporates the top tube. I'm sorry if my head's cut off. The top tube and the stem. But now I want to check my reach to the bars because all bars have different shapes. Some curve back, some curve forward, or sweep forward or sweep backwards. So this particular bar from tip to tip. So tip to tip is a little over 73. Let's call it 73.2. All right. So 95-ish. Why do I say ish? And this is going to drive some people crazy. I have at least 10 bikes, minimum. None of my bikes are set up perfectly, and yet I can still get on all of those bikes, or I should say identically. They're not all set up identically. But yet I can get on any of those bikes and ride a Century tomorrow. So don't obsess about the silliness, please. All right, so 95-ish, 56 to the stem clamp, and then 73-ish tip to tip. Tip of saddle, tip of brake hood. Now, once I start doing the work, that's pretty close where I want my saddle to be. So we have the saddle on here, and we're just going to tack it into place. We're going to go with the saddle centered again, and then take some quick measurements and see where we're at. Now the SQ Labs saddle has a very low profile. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Compared to many other saddles. So my guess is the seat post is going to have to come down. These saddles from rail to the top are really, really low. So your seat post is higher. So when you put on another saddle that is taller from the rail to the top, then sometimes you have to drop your seat post. So let's just see where we're at. So remember, 95-ish. Yeah, so that's pretty close to 90, yeah, like 95.8. So we're gonna have to come down a little bit. So in setting up your saddle, what works for me is I set the saddle height first. That's just a little bit too high. Come down a millimeter or two. Yeah, so there's my 95-ish. Next thing is I want to check my setback. Wow, that's right on. And then I want to check 56, 73-ish. Yeah, so that saddle is pretty much perfect right there. So 5 Newton meters is the first thing we're going to do. I struggle with getting saddles perfect. There's 5. And now the saddle rails, 16 Newton meters. So crank this bad boy up. This says 15, so 15 is good enough for me. Don't really need 16. I'm not a huge rider. So that's snug. Go to the other side. Snug. And now start bringing up the torque. So evenly distributed both sides. You don't have to be as careful because these are steel rails. They're very resilient. But if you have good practices, then you'll always do a careful job no matter what you're working on. Carbon rails, steel rails. All right, we're getting close to the torque now. Tick. And there it is. All right, so now we are torqued down to 15 Newton meters. We've got the right height, we've got the right reach. If I was not doing a video for YouTube and explaining to you how I do my saddle height measurement, I would not have removed the pedals. But that was a teaching moment. All right, so we're just gonna hop on real quick and see where we're at. This feels really weird. So So even though this saddle's in the same place, my first impression, and that's because I've been riding that SQ-Lab saddle for so long, for so many thousands of miles. My first impression is so here's the thing. For me, what makes okay, my first impressions, the SQ-Lab saddle for me just disappears underneath me. Like I don't feel any of its features. I don't feel that it's got a depression. I don't feel that it's got a flat nose. I mean, I know it's there. I use it to my benefit, but I don't really feel that. Whereas this saddle, I think it's tolerable, but I immediately notice the ridges. I notice that my sit bones, now I ride a 14 centimeter, and according to the Ritchey measurements, this is a 145, but I just feel like I'm not fully supported like I am on the SQ-Lab saddle, where the SQ-Lab saddle is just like I said, I think it's definitely tolerable. I think it's rideable. So maybe I should go outside and see what it feels like. But I immediately know that this saddle is different. And not for better or worse, just that I know it's different. I know I have to sit on it differently. I don't know that my sit bones are properly supported. So I'll just need to take it outside and ride it a little bit and see what it feels like outside. More to come. Well, that was a very interesting experience. I went out on the road, and this saddle felt completely different than on the trainer. And what I felt was that the saddle was too high. And I'm talking like a smidge, maybe that ish. So we're going to drop it down a little bit, which will be interesting because it'll be lower than my SQ-Lab saddle was. And I think it's just because of those ridges, but it was better, much better. In fact, I was initially disappointed, and I don't know if that came across in the previous clips, but I was initially disappointed. So now we're going to drop the saddle a smidge, which is just as technical as ish, and we'll see how that goes. So we're going to come down what I believe is about 2 millimeters. All right, so let's try this again. Yeah, that's a lot better. So I'll take this outside again, check it, and I think after that adjustment, I'm still going to bring a multi-tool. Oh, toolkit's over there. Still going to bring a multi-tool with me. And on days where I'm demoing a saddle, I actually just have a separate 5mm Allen wrench separate from my multi-tool, and I just carry that in my back pocket as I'm going out to test things out. So it'll be 5mm for these two bolts, 5mm for this, so I can slide the saddle fore and aft, and I can do height adjustment as well. So I think it's good enough to get out on the road and do a demo ride. Last thing before we go, I know that I get this question a lot, and I'm just like, oh, you know, the face palm emoji. Oh. No, I don't put a spirit level on my saddles to make them level. I just don't. I put them on, I ride them, and then I tilt them based on how they feel. Same thing I do with customers. When customers come in for a bike fit, I don't use a level to level the saddle. But, you know, you just kind of put the saddle on, you got to put it on, and then you make adjustments. It's like when I was getting my master's degree, and we had these groups, and we had to come up with something. You couldn't make edits if you didn't have something. So we would assign someone within the group to come up with, you know, the body of our paper, and then once we had something, good, bad, whatever, at least you had something, and then you can make edits, and then you can flesh it out. And you know, same thing with, you know, Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence. You know, that got chopped quite a bit, but you had to have something first to make edits on. So you just put the saddle on, and then you make your edits. Nose, fore, aft, something. And where the saddle ends up is where it was supposed to be. It may not be level. All right, that is all for now. And we're going to do some riding on it and then report back. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. We'll see you up the road.